When we fought the Civil War, the federal government took out loans to pay the soldiers and to buy the equipment and to fight the Civil War. And at the end of the Civil War, our federal debt was 35% of the gross domestic product of the United States. But something very interesting happened. We never paid it off. We kept paying it down, but rolling debt. And throughout the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and into the first part of the 20th century, the federal debt just kept rolling. We now have a new base. It was not our strength, it was not our resource, it was our debt that began to drive us. In World War I, the debt to fight World War I was 40% of the gross domestic product. You see a trend here. It was 30%, then it was 35%, now it's 40%. After World War I, we never paid it off. We hit the roaring 20s, and then the stock market crashed, and there was no way to pay anything off. So we rolled it, and we borrowed, and the national debt went up again. Then, in World War II, we borrowed to fight World War II, and the federal debt went to 120% of the gross domestic product of the United States. We never paid it off. We just rolled it. After the Vietnam War, it was a relatively small amount, but after the economic collapse of 2008 and 9, the federal government has simply borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. And now the federal debt is at 105% of gross domestic product. First time in American history, first time in our history, when it was not a war that caused the federal government to borrow more than we all earn in a year. What's fascinating in all this is that in the 1980s, the federal government changed the nature of our economy. It had been based on assets. How much gold is in Fort Knox? Doesn't matter anymore, because no longer is our economy based on gold. It is not based on assets. Now our economy is based on debt. When Pam and I got married 35 years ago, the idea of having a credit score did not exist. You got a credit card, you build a little credit history, but it was about assets. How much do you earn? How much do you own? Show me all the things that you have together, and we'll give you an ability to borrow on that basis. Not anymore. It's all based on credit score. How much debt can you carry? What's interesting is it has been a major shift from functioning out of assets to functioning out of deficits. Now, the reason why I bring all this up is that that's the promise of Philippians 4. If you understand what has happened in our entire culture, you will understand Philippians 4 much more. Paul says, I have always functioned from a foundation of assets. I don't function from deficit. I don't think of what I don't have. I don't think of my gaps. I don't start with my wounds. I'm not defining myself as empty. I don't see the challenges. I don't see the gaps, the holes. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I'm not frustrated. I'm not out. Give me food. I'm good with that. Take all the food away. I'm good with that. Give me resources. I'm good with that. Take all the resources away. I'm good with that too. It doesn't destroy me. It doesn't upset me. It doesn't undermine me. When God spoke to Job, the whole book of Job is an attempt to open up these gigantic pits of pain, of frustration, of destruction, of death, of loss. Look, you had children, now you have nothing. Look, you had homes, now you have nothing. Look, you had animals, now you have nothing. Curse God. Hate God. God took it all away. God says, you know, that doesn't mean anything at all. Nothing. I'm God. The question that you're asking is irrelevant, because I am God. So Paul says, I understand it. I understand how to live my life from the basis of asset. In this promise, there's a tension. I call it contented passion. We've been going to Honduras now for 9 years. In 2005, we had a group of college students that came, and I think probably some of you know this story. We were climbing up a hill, and as we take groups down there, I taught them some of the issues that we struggle with as how we engage a different culture than our own. One of the ways I do that is what I now call a question sequence. The question sequence is 3 parts: to ask questions, to get answers, and then to ask better questions. Always being in a mind frame to ask a better question about what's going on. What are the roots of this situation? What are the fruits of it? Where did it come from? Where is it going? How do I play in this situation? How am I engaged in where it has come from and where it is going? It's both of those. So we were climbing up a mountain, and a couple of girls didn't want to keep climbing, and so we sat down to rest while the others went on up the hill. And one of the girls said to me, you know, you keep saying this, ask questions, get answers, ask better questions. What's the better question you're asking about Honduras? You've been coming here for 4 or 5 years. Are you asking better questions now? I said, now that is a good question. Nobody's asking that. And I gestured down the hill, and we could see all the Morrison laid out in front of us, and I said, you know, we've come up the hill, we've been here for now most of the week. We've seen kids playing with tire rims from bicycles as a toy, running around in their underwear. They get sick regularly, they don't have clean water, many of the families don't have steady electricity, the streets are dirt, the schools aren't reliable, the government isn't reliable. Life is just constantly full of pain and difficulty. But you know what? Everyone we meet is happy. They eat beans and rice. Maybe once a day or twice a day, most families. But they're happy. They see no need to change at all. I said, what we're trying to do is start a school to give them education, to give them better questions so they can have more resource and actually change their culture. So here's my question. How do we introduce to a happy people discontent? But not so much discontent that they either give up or leave. How do we introduce enough discontent so they want to change and have the means to do it? And this girl said to me, now that's a good question. What's the answer? I said, I don't know. It's another question. I have no idea. But somehow in the challenge is that great issue. Paul says, I am content. I'm satisfied. So why not? Why don't we just stay here? Why don't we just be home? Cut the church down until we have about 10 or 12 and just be happy. Why not just say, this is good enough? We don't need anything more. We don't need the challenge, the pain, the difficulty, what's going to draw out of us. We don't need any of that. We're content. I've learned to be content in every circumstance. But then Paul turns around and says, but I can do everything. That's the future. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. And so he has, in the midst of his contentment, a passion for change. He's not unhappy in the process. He's always fully resourced. But instead of looking at what he doesn't have or what it will cost or what the gap is or where the emptiness is or where the pain is or where the wound is, he never starts there. He starts from the asset of the one who gives me strength. And from that relationship, everything else proceeds. And so the promise for us is to live in the wealth of assets instead of the threat of deficits. Here's the promise. Paul says, in any and every circumstance, I can do all things do the one things we say.